today's subject, which is Wrath on Wax. Wrath on Wax. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of angry music out there. I don't actually listen to it myself a whole lot. Some people would actually use it as a means of counteracting their own sort of pent-up rage. I'm sure it was fertile grounds for discussion. I'll just leave it at that.
I found a lot of angry type records and listened to them, but they didn't quite approach wrath and had to think what wrath meant to me or could mean. And I came up with something more subtle, pensive, pestering, annoying. And I was thinking in those terms. And then I thought, well, what equates that musically? I thought dissonance. So that's what I was primarily concerned with, this interplay of harmony and dissonance.
I didn't think too hard about it. I have a ton of angry records, given that I have a ton of hardcore and a ton of metal. So I have a lot of in-your-face angry records in my collection. But I sort of set myself the challenge of not choosing just two hardcore or two metal records, and I succeeded.
Back before everybody had tattoos, Hell Awaits by Slayer. Slayer,
Hell
the
yeah.
first and last word in heavy, wrathful sounds, perhaps. We've got Hell Awaits, Kill Again, Praise of Death, Necrophiliac. You know, I mean, boy, they're maybe they're just grossed out, but no, they're kind of angry about it. There's this kind of existential revulsion, I think, that fuels a lot of this music, and that's part of the fun is kind of taking the slop that has been sort of poured in a bucket over them and passing it on. I think they're just kind of giving as good as they get. So Hell awaits for a um, damned race of people in a doomed society. There's this kind of payback quality to it. I'm particularly fond of the last track, Hardening of the Arteries, because of this great drum break in it. It just kind of all of the music stops and there's just this kind of pummeling, and then it resumes. And I think it's Praise of Death. It's the last track on one of the two sides. Anyway, these guys are angry. They're covered in blood and spit and other vile substances depicted on the cover. And that's just this kind of abyssal fall into materiality, and then through some kind of otherworldly portal, just the nether expanse. Slayer. It's anger as a trip, the wrath of the damned. Um, then the second item record I chose is by the
Uh-oh.
deceptively named Swans.
Hmm.
Or I
Good
don't even know if
choice.
I don't think they really like using an article. It's just Swans. And these serious-faced young men on the back are responsible for making some of the most punishing music that I know of. And but the great thing about the Wrath here, or the great thing, the signature thing, and this makes it completely unappetizing for some people, I guess, because it's agonizing, but is how internalized it is. It really there seems to be this is just the ultimate soundtrack to resentful masochism, from what I can tell. Yeah, they've got two drummers, bass, guitar, and it's just like getting, kicked when you're down by the most sort of corrupt cop on the beat. In fact, that's the name of the album, or an abbreviated version of that, just Cop. Slow motion ride to hell, as opposed to a precipitous descent like Slayer's. And there's just this kind of all-pervasive disgust at the world and oneself. This is the sound of the sort of venomous spittle that is provoked by that sensation. Yeah, on to you, Chris.
First record I chose is Raw Powers, Screams from the Gutter. This was recorded in 1984, released in 1985. These guys, they were from sort of northern Italy, north central Italy. Um, this is omnidirectionally angry. They're angry at pretty much everything in every single song. They're angry at the government. They're angry at cops. They're angry at the army. They're angry at political parties, left and right, it would appear. You know, as I said, I have a lot of hardcore records. A lot of them are pretty wrathful, but something about this one, I don't know. If it's not the angriest one I have, it's definitely one of the angriest. Italy in the early 80s was just coming out of the years of lead. It was a pretty crazy time in Italy. Tons of political assassinations, you know, politicians and business leaders being kidnapped and murdered, bombings. Another thing about Italy, Italian hardcore, a lot of its bands are kind of known for being like wild, verging on out of control. This isn't like that at all. These guys are tight. These guys can really play. This is more of like a controlled demolition, like if you somehow got a cheetah on a leash, maybe. You know, I called it a hardcore record, and that's mainly what it is. But this came out right when crossover, you know, the sort of merging of metal and punk. The lyrics are barked. The songs are all like a minute and a half long. And they're pretty much all political. So I call it hardcore. 17 songs in 26 minutes, something like that. So fantastic stuff. Okay, my second choice, Public Image Limited's. I think this is just called Album. Yeah. From 1986. This is a really interesting record because I think it's kind of an outlier in their catalog. I have the impression it's pretty polarizing. It was my introduction to them, so I didn't really know any better. You know, people who would like their previous, I don't know how many albums did they have? 4 or 5 albums prior to this, something like that. You know, this is John Lydon's post Sex Pistols, post punk outfit. And they had been at times quite experimental, definitely not punk sounding, definitely not rock sounding. This album, John Lydon himself kind of referred to it as a metal album, which isn't true at all. But in the same interview, he also said that he really liked Van Halen, so go figure. It is kind of a hard rock record. And to create this record, I guess he fired his existing band, and he hired a bunch of like hot shit, you know, sort of session musician guys. Like Steve Vai plays on this record, as does Tony Williams, you know, who played with like Bitches Brew era Miles Davis, as does Ginger Baker randomly. And it was produced by Bill Laswell, who gave it this, you know, typically Laswellian, like big production. It sounds big and bright, 80s in the best possible way. Onto the wrath portion of this. It's incandescent. John Lydon, pretty angry guy. He seems extra angry on this record. Like every song is basically like a diss track. It's just one insult after another. Like the first song, FFF, that means farewell. That stands for farewell, my fair weathered friend. And it's basically one long insult, maybe directed at the band's old drummer. I'm not sure. There's another song called Fishing, which is the chorus is go crawl back into your dustbin, repeated over and over again. You get the picture. Even like, you know, I think this album, it got a lot of airplay on MTV, and it had a hit, a song called Rise. A little bit mellower musically than most of the rest of this record. It's got this chiming guitar, kind of like, I don't know, it's like a mutant U2 riff or something almost. You know, this is 86, so it kind of makes sense. But the lyrics are kind of like a found poem, essentially. I guess Lydon, he took all the quotes, he took all the lyrics. They were all quotes from an interview with survivors of torture under apartheid. So it was kind of a protest song. and he just rearranged them into this song called Rise. He sort of closes by repeating over and over again, anger is an energy, which sums up this record pretty well.
Right.
To you, Jackson.
Well, I picked Albert Ayler, Witches and Devils, which is also known as Spirits, from 1964. And he was a tragic character who was dead at 34, presumed suicide. His body was found in the East River. But he created an enormous amount of music in his short time on Earth. And is considered an original melodist. So he works with melodies, but they're often dissonant. And the dissonance is really what gave me the cue to being wrathful. This is from the outside jazz or free jazz movement. He's one of the prototypes for that. And what he did is he would create some kind of melody and then develop it during an interactive session with his other musicians. He had a couple bass players, trumpet, and another tenor saxophone player. And they just sort of followed each other and wove these unholy motifs from the original melody. So it is considered innovative in his tone because he used a lot of vibrato and a hard plastic reed to create this unholy bathos of a tone. And for me, just listening to it, it's one of his early records. It's like a second record. I found it odd and quizzical and then often brutal. It is also violent, painful, and excessive. The mood is bleak here. And he really is a great innovator of original motive and improvised melody. And anyone that collects free jazz or is just interested in a challenging listen, anything by Albert Ayler would be good. And my second choice was Stryborg, who is an Australian living in Tasmania and was part of the One Man Metal documentary by Vice. This is a little bit more peculiar as far as its wrathful qualities. He's interested in the destructive power in nature, sort of a satanic concept. And he's definitely a misanthrope. But the music in this is varied and very musical. He's a fantastic drummer, and some of the drum riffs combined with the guitar riffs, synthesizer, organ, create an impressive ambience that is very dark. It's almost like he's summoning you to go deep into deeper layers in nature. It is low key overall, and it has a persistent warning and seduction to avoid civilization. He sort of creates a state of vexation, which is worrisome and pensive. And anyone that's interested in cold wave or ambient black metal, that's what I consider this, would be happy with this record. And this is from 2007. So those are my wrathful choices.
Slayer action figures. Shake its fist and growl a little bit.
It's inflicting hurt from having been hurt.
Hurt people, hurt people.